Welcome, everyone. My guest today is Lead Analyst Logan Mohtashami to talk about Jobs Week and tariffs and all the other variables that can affect mortgage rates as we head into spring home buying season. Logan, welcome back to the podcast.
It is. What are you smirking about?
It was what you were doing with your hair before we got on, actually.
You find that funny?
Yes. Anyway, okay, we have a lot to talk about. Man, crazy stuff. Let's start with tariffs.
Okay. So first, before we go into this conversation, if I really thought we were going to have a major tariff policy, and this is what I thought back in 2016, there's no negotiation on tariffs. You simply implement the tariffs as soon as possible, and you need to keep them at least 4 to 12 years because you have to change behavior, companies and everything. I mean, you need years and years of tariffs because what's going to happen is other countries are going to tariff back on you, and you need to adjust to that as well. Right. So what's happening this morning, this is Friday morning, Trump has gone from 25% tariffs to Colombia to no tariffs to 2.5% tariffs to 25% tariffs to China, Canada, and Mexico, whatever it is. If I took it seriously, you just simply have the tariffs and you don't do anything. There's no negotiation. This is why I always say that people have to be careful about the trade war tap dance. That's how I call it. Back then I called it a tap dance. Now I call it a tap dance. So the question, and we brought this up, I think a few weeks ago, that if people start calling a bluff with President Trump's personality, he's probably just going to go do it just because he doesn't like to be called out. So at some point, he's going to need to actually do the tariffs and have it stick, or everyone's going to realize. I mean, Sarah, how did the Spartans eventually die off?
I don't know the answer.
You don't know, but eventually people caught on to their fighting tactics and found ways to go around it. Right. So if you're doing the same game plan and the market's kind of not okay, because I felt like today as like the tariff talk became like infrastructure week vibes. Remember infrastructure week? We're all supposed to get infrastructure week. And oh my God, here it comes. Like if Godzilla came and destroyed a city, then that's infrastructure week, right? Because you're going to get, construction being done. But it'll be interesting because by the time this comes out, it's Monday morning, we'll see. But I'm at the point to where President Trump needs to actually start putting a tariff on and have it stick, or else we're just going to be this trade war tap dance again. And we fall back to the, we 100% population in America, 336 million people. 162 million of them are, 49% of people are workers, but 100% is net consumers. So this is one of the reasons why I didn't believe we'd get in a major trade war back in 2018-19. The economies are much different now. This is not the 1890s or 1910. You're not going to get rid of income tax and replace it with a tariff tax, which the percentage of GDP on something like this is just not, you can't use those two periods of time. So we'll see, but I'm at the point where I think, you're going to have to do something because you don't want to be called a bluff all the time because you start to lose your negotiating power. So we'll see what happens on Monday, but that's the vibe I got this morning on Friday.
So on Friday morning, what we're seeing is a lot of conversation taking Trump to task or saying like, oh, he's not serious, or, oh, this isn't going to happen. So that's what I'm trying to figure out, like what's prompting this on your side.
Yeah, there's just this talk market back and forth. It's just kind of all over the place. Like realistically, if you really were a tariff person, you simply implement them and you're not budging because you need years and years of behavior changes from not only domestic, but international. And that's how it works, right? You can't be, this is a negotiation tactic. It works on the uninitiated, but Sarah,
and yet, here we are. Here we are.
We are the initiated. And you remember, you have to play the person. And if you're doing the same playbook, the markets are going to be kind of, and we always remember this because in 2018-19, what happened was the stock market would fall. They bring out Larry Kudlow or somebody and they say, oh, we have talks with China. We can't have that kind of process. You're either in or you're out. right? You had to stick tariffs and then say, oh, all you companies have to deal with it. Consumers, you have to deal with it. Whatever it is, this is it, and move on with it. And then, you could focus on, but, the back and forth stuff. So that's why I think he's going to have to actually do something, or else it's just all a negotiation ploy back and forth, which I always thought it was, because there wasn't no flat. We're going to do this. Get ready for the next 4 years. This is how it's going to be. There's no negotiation there. Then you got, okay, serious. And then you have to do all these other things around it. So we'll see what happens on Monday.
We will see. Okay. Also, this airs on Monday. It's going to be Jobs Week.
Yes. And we sit here today. I love it. PCE inflation day. Yesterday on Thursday was the quarterly GDP PCE data, 2 handles. But here we are, 3, 6, 12-month PCE, 2 handles everywhere around. So I put up a chart where I showed the growth rate of PCE, and it's like the peak was 7%. And then it had oh my God, the inflationary aspects of a global pandemic is going 500 to 600 years. And you know what? It was really, really bad back in the old days. I mean, how life was on the docks and how bad it's just, In any case, the disinflation happens from global pandemics. And that was always the concern, especially for housing, that the Fed was going to be very, very aggressive. Like for me, I've stick to my guns here. I would have stopped at 4%. Because the forward-looking forecast of yours would have matched your PCE. This is why I knew somebody spiked the Fed's eggnog in 2022, because all of a sudden they changed. They flipped the books. I was like, oh my, they're going to the old aggressive model right here. So that's not going to be good for housing, because a lot of people are going to think, well, the growth rate of inflation falls. And mortgage rates are going to be sub 6%. The builders are like, hey guys, we're up here at 2019 sales levels. Oh, existing home sales, you can't do that. So that was always a concern. And it's 2025. It stuck the entire way because labor over inflation, because if jobless claims were running toward 300,000, a whole different story. They flinch, and the bond market flinches too. 2 times we've had rates fall when there's an economic scare or the labor market is perceived to be. But even softness in the labor market, not good enough. Breaking. Oh my, jobless claims rising. Oh. So we're getting there.
So what do you expect to see this week? So you've laid out the case for like they're not doing anything until it breaks. Do you think we just see another slow we're heading towards more jobless claims?
The jobless claims data is still very good. So that's not the issue. But again, the private payroll data has been slowing down because it's been primarily driven by government and healthcare service. Okay, so healthcare service, we all know we're older, and there needs to be demand there. I get this question all the time. I'm going to address it again. What if Musk just fires a bunch of federal workers?
Right.
Government payrolls were one of the reasons why the headline numbers. That would, in a sense, slow the payroll number down and down, because manufacturing was lost back in 2024. It wasn't like a huge decline. I think it was like 82,000 or 87,000. If you lower the total job growth data and you have more people working, the unemployment rate increases. The question is now, is it population growth is slowing down? Obviously, are we going to have that labor force pick up where the unemployment rate keeps on rising? Or is this authentic? Well, guess what? We're starting to lose jobless claims start to pick up, which will be the case with government workers, just like it would be for construction and manufacturing. And then you put them all together, claims rise. That in theory would be 10-year yield would fall down, and that. I hate having that conversation, because you're basically advocating for a government official to fire people from their jobs, right? These are households. These people have children, they have their lives, so, but I get that question because so much of the job growth was government last year. Private payroll, keep an eye on that, and then keep an eye on, as we always say, residential construction workers. Because historically what happens is when this data line starts to fade, the Fed tends to ignore it. Right. So the question is this going to be another cycle, another notch on their belt? Like, do you ever see the movie Gangs of New York?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes. You remember the guy with the bat and he had the notches on his bat? That's
Oh
why I
yeah.
think about the Fed and economic cycles with that. Is this going to be another notch on the Fed's bat where they go, oh, residential construction workers are losing their jobs, but the general economy is moving fine, so we need to, Bowman, who's the most hawkish Fed member, she came out and said, oh, there's no tight policy out there. Look, the stock market is up. The job market is great. What do we, where this is not restrictive policy. And then like everyone's throwing eggs and everything out. But again, labor over inflation, right? That was always the key. So we have triggers. I'm trying to teach people triggers. I always say it's the cheat code. Like construction labor is always a cheat code here. So the wild card for 2025. So we're off and going, right? 2024 is all done. Here we are, the first month, and we'll see how it flies.
We know that we won't have, those if we lose government jobs, it won't be in this report, right? I mean, that hasn't even started happening
No,
yet.
that hasn't happened. Again, job openings is critical because the Fed likes it, right? And the hires of job openings data is really, really fallen. The quits have really fallen from the peak. The job openings itself has fallen. The ECI wage index, the component of the Fed tracks, that came out today too, and is showing the deceleration of wage growth as well. So remember, wages are the Fed keeps on saying we don't really target wage. Yes, you do. Stop lying. Come on. Okay, so the ECI wage. So if the quits data keeps on falling, the hires keep on falling, it becomes a little bit more of everything is narrowing down. And what Powell said is his own words. If you have a job, it's great. If you're looking for a job, and I'm like, okay, you keep on making me look good, homie. Keep it up, right? You guys are just awesome. You just stick right in the line. That's why we have to look at job openings and the subcomponents of it, because again, we're not firing a huge amount of people. Right. The Fed's like, we're not firing. If we were, we'd change. By the time that happens, Sarah, it's a little bit too late. But, the jobless claims data, we put it in part of the tracker for everybody to get versed with it. And then Jobs Friday. And again, one of the things that the Fed was actually not encouraged about the last few months of 2024 was that wage growth was picking up again. We were like heading down to 3%. And all of a sudden that stopped. They're like, whoa, that can't happen. No. You people think you can make that kind of wages? No. Make our lives difficult. Then you're going to buy a house and then you're going to have kids and you're going to buy more stuff. That's inflationary. So wage growth, keep an eye on it. The Fed's old model is 3% wage growth, 1% productivity. Productivity is done so good. I just don't believe it. The Fed doesn't believe it either. If it happens, it's like the miracle of the U.S. It would be like the biggest story this century if we really have authentic productivity gains and it flushes out, because right now you would need like 4.7% or higher wage growth to be inflationary under models. But productivity has been much better than anybody thought. So we'll see. Again, jobs week, we some of the wildest moves we've seen in the 10-year yield and mortgage rates comes off of jobs week. Sometimes it's nothing but boring, right? So we'll see. And again, 10-year yield peak forecast for 2025 was 470, 7.25 mortgage rates was the peak. Those are in play. Now we went above 470 for a little bit, for a few days. But again, when we're at that level, you're just going to need stronger economic data, more inflation, stuff like that to warrant people to sell bonds and not buy it. And that's why we do channels. Go look at that 5-year of the 10-year yield. We don't target mortgage rates, but we target channels. It's the same thing I did in the last decade.
Let's talk about bond yields a little bit because, from a news perspective, the short amount of time that Trump has been in office since the inauguration has been filled with news, right? Sometimes conflicting. We're still trying to figure out what the funding freeze and then the rescission of the funding freeze, and then no, it's just the rescission of a memo, not what's in the memo. All of these things are very confusing from a news perspective. From a bond market perspective, how has it been since he's been president? How is the bond market reacting?
So when you, in theory, have less government spending, that's less money into the economy. So one of the reasons a lot of people would say, a lot of middle-aged men podcast stock traders who got the recession and stock market crash wrongs. Some people would say they're not versed with, fiscal dominance, where the deficits are very high in the sense that the economy has an extra kick in there. I would always argue that this is something I wrote like 6 years ago. 2024 and on, you just have so much mandatory payouts, right? Because we have so many people 65 and over now that you're going to have a natural deficit curve that's going to be higher. I wrote that article in 2019, like $71 trillion in federal debt by 2060. The 10-year yield is still here. Everyone knows this. You can model this out. It's not like the bond market wouldn't know this. So here we are at I think the last thing I saw was like 451 on the 10-year yield. We just had an inflation surge from the pandemic. We have all this government spending. The bond yields are pretty much below what they were in the 1990s. So there is no like vigilantes or anything like this. If you really were a broke company or a broke country, 10-year yield would be shooting. Like go look at Russia's 10-year yield. Okay, go look at like Turkey when they had to deal with that. We're not those economies or that small of a country. So money went into bonds, but the economic data will flow the 10-year yield. If there is anything really huge, like of high velocity, it would actually be a negative. But there's just so much of the spending is mandatory payouts out there, and there's all these CHIP acts and everything that we've done, and that filters into the construction data or manufacturing data. But there's a lot of government spending. Some of it where it doesn't matter who the president is. You literally have. This is why we do the Logan's Run. If you did the Logan's Run not at age 20 was a bit extreme for the book, 33 for the movie. Okay, your housing story is dead, by the way, if that was the case. But if you did a Logan's Run at 65 and everyone died at 65, the mandatory payouts would all go away. So the deficit would fall naturally. Of course, your economy would fall because you don't have workers or consumers. But the 10-year yield will really revolve around economic data. Or if it gets a slight, oh my God, the city economic surprise index is beating. Oh, no, it's missing. The economy is getting weaker. 10-year yield moves off that. And that's why we do channels. Happened in the last decade, 1.6 to 3. That was the forecast every year. The range in there mostly. And then here, 380 to 470, the last 2 years, that's kind of been the case. So we'll take the economic data over government spending all the time.
Well, and I ask because, we are now officially in February when this comes out. So, spring home buying season, this is it. We're ramping up. And I feel like, the mortgage rates we have now are kind of the mortgage rates we're going to have, right? Do you see anything significant happening to make them better?
Whenever economic data gets weaker, mortgage rates get better. I mean, it's just.
I know, but the economic data you're talking about.
I mean, the thing is that when we do ebbs and flows with data, it's like, why do we see channels all the time? Well, the economic data gets better. It's a higher bar to beat. And then rates go up. Rates might impact that. And all of a sudden, economic data gets weaker. It's the flow of data and how the 10-year yield works off of it. This is why I detest mortgage rate targeting and like 10-year yield targets. You do ranges. You stay in the range because nothing stays static. You just have to protect the edges of your ranges, right? Anything above 470, you really need data. The hoarder line. That's why we created the hoarder. I know you people think I say it wrong. I'm going to keep on saying
you do say it wrong.
I'm going to say it for the rest of my life. So y'all got to get over that. The hoarder line was there because, we broke it, but all of a sudden economic data got better and there was a lower bar. So the flow of data moves the 10-year yield and rates. The difference now is that the spreads are much better now than they were in 2023. So the volatility is really compressing down on rates where you don't see too much movement. So again, one or two bad reports, money flows into the 10-year. We've seen this happen. Right? We can't be stuck in it's going to be this rate the whole year. And then all of a sudden, what happened last year, the labor data started to get softer, revisions, everything, 10-year yield went down. All of a sudden, we went from a point where nobody's going to buy the 10-year yield at 5% because we're broke to within months, we're at 3.62. Oh, the recession's here. And ebbs and flows. You just got to learn how to track the economic. I know it's not for everyone, but the chart daddy says it's for me. Let me cook. Let me do what I do best. The Instagram family, we're trying to get that to 1 million people a month. Those stories, those charts, as you could all see, I don't have much of a life. I'm literally like doing this even in 12 o'clock at night. Look at the 10-year yield trading at this time. But so work off the economic data more than kind of other things. I know government spending, are they going to fire workers? And that explains late 2022, early 2023, all of 2023, 2024, and where we are right now in 2025.
Okay, so basically, people just have to keep looking at the tracker, keep
looking at the tracker, and again, always think of the wild card for 2025 is going to be construction workers, residential construction workers, not so much remodelers, but apartment workers are at risk. There was a really interesting talk I had with a market participant about, they're like, well, what about new home sales and everything? I said, new home sales crashed in 2022. The builders made a labor market adjustment then. They actually laid off people. They haven't really come back. Then mortgage purchase application data for the builders is actually still positive year over year. For all this talk, if it was straight negative, it's a whole different story. Then the cancellation rates and all these things happen. Then you have a more fluid backdrop for labor to really be taken out on single family. Apartments are more at risk because it's taken 2 years to finish them, and now they're finishing them, and they're like, wait, permits are back there again? What? You mean you got no work for me? So different backdrop when you take single family and apartments. Think apartments first, and always think Texas and Florida, right? Everybody said ground zero was Boise, which we're going to Boise in a week, and we're going to be in Boise twice within the next 6 weeks. That wasn't ground zero. That wasn't ground zero, but Florida and Texas make a little bit more sense because inventory is rising for the existing home sales market and the new home sales market. And then if you really wanted to see labor weakness, you'd see it in those two states first.
We talked about, I asked you about well, what about deportations? How's that going to affect construction workers? So far, we've seen pretty small efforts there and not specifically on construction workers. I think there've been some factories, some different things. So we haven't seen any effect of that yet, if we're going to at all.
I've always will say the same thing here. We have deportation numbers every single year, and miraculously somehow the builders find a way to build homes when the new home sales data grows. This happened in the last decade because in the last decade, there was a lot of people leaving the residential because the housing bubble really crashed construction. And the builders were complaining about labor throughout the entire decade. But when new home sales grows, oh my God, we finished projects. So if there was a case, you're going to start to see builders say, I have 59% of my crew not here because they're afraid they're going to get deported. We can't close this project until another 4 to 5 months out. Something like that, where the turn times would actually be adjusted to the labor. You'll see that when people start raising their turn times for builders. But I'm telling you, if mortgage rates went down to 3.5%, the builders are building homes. Somehow they're going to find labor and they're going to get stuff done. So kind of that whole labor construction thing, be mindful of it, but you're going to see the turn times be going first. Then you could go into this. And that assumes that the builders cannot find any other employment or workers in that front. Then we could go into that discussion out there. But I don't like hypotheticals where the variables are questionable with the timing of a cycle. I have to live minute by minute, day to day, right? We run a quarter mile, whatever the Fast and Furious line was. Work off of that first. Then, trust me, if that was an issue, it would be so prevalent in the data, and people would see it. Builders would say, half my crew is gone. I can't find. We're not there yet. When we get to that spot, we'll address it. But until then, I'm not the politics. Bleh.
I know.
Uke.
Okay, what else? What else should people be paying attention to?
So by the time Monday's out, everybody's read the tracker that has access to the tracker. We want to see again where pending contracts are doing. Purchase application data, 2 positive weeks, 1 flat week on a week-to-week basis. There's nothing really big happening there, not on the negative side or the positive side, but it is technically still positive. That's a forward-looking indicator. It's the seasonality of housing demand too. So we're keep an eye on that because usually February is the month, the last 2 years, that the data falls. noticeably because rates are higher. So this is why we're going to really keep focused on February. Why? By the time the economic summit is in Dallas, Texas, not only I'm going to be there, Mike Simonson, we had a host of economists, Daryl from Redfin, Jessica from NAR, Lisa from Blight, Barry Habib. We have a ton of other mortgage and political people talking that day. But by the time February comes, we're going to see the data. And again, new listings data should get over 80,000 during the peak seasonal months. That should be the case. Inventory should grow as long as rates stay elevated, right? Inventory should grow. The supply and demand equilibrium, I'm one of the lower price forecast people for 2025. That works itself out. The velocity isn't really fast, but by the time the end of February, we have a really good idea. And remember, we are months ahead of everyone. By the time our data right now, you're going to see it, in April and some of the sales reports, these pending contracts go signed. It takes 30, sometimes even 65, 70 days by the time it gets a final sold. And then we work off of that. That's why the tracker is designed to be today and look tomorrow, not in the past.
Love it. Okay. I'm going to wrap up with that. Thank you so much, Logan. As always, we'll talk to you again soon.
Pleasure, Sarah.